Megan. Okay, so the English muffins are over here, and I fit about 9 in the pan, and then I have these 5, and I'll do these 5 on the stovetop because those will be mine, and the 9 in the pan will be for the order that I'm making. So I don't mind standing at the stove for 5, but to do a couple dozen, it's a little much. So now we have the rest of our dough. This is the other half of the ball that was in there. And all I've done is cleaned up my space a little bit. I have a silicone mat that I got that is oven safe, but I don't like to use them in the oven. So I do use them when I'm making either cinnamon rolls or calzones because I find it easier to roll the calzone. You could certainly do it on wax paper or parchment paper, but this is just a good size and there's measuring marks on it. I took my rice flour and sprinkled a little bit on the bottom, and I went and grabbed my tiny sifter thing. This is from the dollar store. So again, you don't have to get anything fancy, and you could just scoop some rice flour in here and sprinkle it around. The benefit of using something like this is that it makes a thin layer rather than if you did it with your hand, it would be kind of clumpy. But either way works. Don't make this complicated. Not a big deal. So I did want to show you that though. And so that's all I've got here so far. I have my dough that has been sitting, whoops, and my mat, and my rice flour coating. Today I'm making a spinach, pepperoni, and olive calzone. So I have my ingredients ready to go. A lot of times I will put butter down on the dough, and then I'll put my ingredients. I wanted to try something different this time because I like to experiment. So I'm actually going to put mayonnaise and see how that changes the flavor of the calzone. It's a moisture barrier, so the spinach, the olives, and the pepperoni will stick to it better. It adds a little bit of moisture in that roll part of the calzone, and then hopefully it'll add some flavor that butter doesn't. I did cook down my fresh spinach and got rid of the liquid because you don't want the extra liquid in there. That makes it difficult. And I seasoned my spinach well. This is just a can of olives that I chopped up, or sliced up, excuse me, and then some pepperoni. I looked for the big ones. They do make pepperoni like big size, but I couldn't find them, so I have the small ones. So we are just gonna start rolling this out. Turns out that whole time I had my rolling pin just right there. I don't know what I was thinking. So this has had a little bit of time. It's actually starting to rise again. So we have more air to roll out of it. And I like to do the 4 directions first when I'm first starting to roll. So it rolls a bit more evenly and there's less kind of wonky edges. So I try to start in the middle and I go, you know, left to right and top to bottom a little bit first, and then I come back and do a little bit more. So this dough, until it relaxes, will try to resist being rolled out as much as possible. But if you just keep at it, it will eventually roll out and stay. Again, this is just the basic bread recipe. Excuse me, you can see why I don't like to do high hydration. I prefer to do the lower hydration, which just means more flour to water ratio. And it's so that I can do things like English muffins and either a calzone or cinnamon roll. If I was just doing this for a boule or even a loaf, I might keep it a higher hydration. But I knew this was going to be for these purposes, so it's a little bit less sticky and easier to roll. And that flour, the rice flour underneath, does, you know, have it moving around on the silicone a little bit, but that's okay. I'd rather have that than have it stick and not roll up later. And again, I use rice flour. You don't have to. You could certainly put regular flour down, but I need to not have the gluten. I apologize. I have the gluten sensitivity, so if I don't introduce unfermented flour, it stays a little bit easier for me to digest. if I start putting flour down that's not gone through the fermentation process and become part of the dough, that becomes difficult for me to digest. And many people find that they can eat sourdough, they just can't eat regular flour unless it has gone through fermentation. And that's actually what led to my bread making journey. Was I was looking for flour that I could tolerate and my kids could tolerate, and I would just be able to make one loaf and we could all eat it, rather than having to buy gluten-free bread and regular bread and organic, and it just got kind of crazy. So I took a bread class in 2018 on how to make bread with ancient grains, was what it was called. And we learned the process of soaking the grains so that they sprouted, which deals with the phytic acid in the grains. And then we dehydrated it and ground it, and then we could bake with it. So it was quite a process, but I thought if I could just get everybody eating the same kind of bread and it was significantly healthier, then we'd be all set. So I went through the whole process, made a loaf or two, and it still bothered me because it was regular yeasted bread. It was not fermented like sourdough. So that then led me down, after I was very sad about that, it led me down the journey of sourdough. And I've had my starter now since 2018. It's going strong. She's, well, I say she. I did name it Earl. I don't know why. It made me think of the Dixie Chicks song, Earl Had to Die. And so I was trying not to kill him, and so I named it Earl. So there's no fun dough pun, but I highly recommend naming your starter because it just makes it more fun when you're talking about it. I have people say to me when I say, I have to go home and feed Earl, and they say, who's Earl? I say, my sourdough starter. So anyway, here we go. We're getting there. The dough is less resistant to being stretched. We've almost filled the whole silicone mat, and we're doing pretty good. And the texture is really great. So I have a couple options here for what I'm gonna put the calzone in. One of the things I have is, sorry for the noise, a glass dish. This is Pyrex again? No. Marinex? I don't know. It's a glass dish. Again, I like to cook in glass. I'm gonna wait and see kind of what it looks like when it's done. Because the other option, I could cook it like a big loaf in here, and that would help it hold its shape. Or I have a cast iron. This is actually what I cook my English muffins in, but the benefit of doing this is if I decide to roll it long ways, I could make it a ring and put it in here and it would cook. I even have the lid for my Dutch oven that fits on top of this size. And so I could cook it in here like a ring rather than a loaf. It all depends on what I feel like doing with it and how big it ends up. So I wasn't sure until I started rolling it out exactly where we would be as far as size. But this is a nice big loaf. I mean, a nice big lump of dough. So we have a big piece to work with, and we can load it up with spinach and olives and cheese, which I'm realizing now I forgot to get and prep. So I'll have to pause the video and go do that. But through the magic of television, you won't even notice. Okay, I think we're gonna call it quits here because it's starting to stay and overlap onto the table. So I'm really happy with the size and the thickness. Excuse me. If you go too thin, you risk it bursting, which isn't the end of the world. It still tastes great. but it can be kind of messy in the oven. So we're gonna leave it here. At this point, I'm gonna actually stretch that just a bit and add, add the mayonnaise. Again, I've never done mayonnaise before, but I have done butter. So I might either use really softened butter in the warmer months. My house is too cold to have soft butter in the winter, but or melt it and use a brush, a grill brush or something, a silicone brush to put it on. But I'm just gonna use some mayonnaise and see what happens this time. I think it's gonna add some nice tangy flavor. And who doesn't like to experiment, right? I don't take breads too seriously. I think life's too short to take things seriously. I've been doing this since 2018, and I still have flops every now and then. So, you know, it's really important to learn when you have a flop. Just the other day, I baked a boule that I guess I didn't cover well, and so the saran wrap had come off a bit, and it was it had gotten like a crust almost in the refrigerator, and it was a long ferment because I was expecting to be able to eat it myself. And I had two choices. I could either say, you know what, let's bake it anyway and see what happens, or let's toss it. Well, I worked on that bread, so there's no way I was going to toss it. So I baked it anyway, and it did not spring in the oven as much as I had wanted it to, but it still came out fine and was delicious, and we're going to enjoy it. But there have been times where the dough has come out a bit dense, and those are the times I make croutons, or those are the times that I make breadcrumbs. If you are the type of person that can't just, you know, pick up a package of breadcrumbs and use them in your meatballs or to bread chicken, take your sourdough flops, dry them out, and stick them in a blender to blend it down, and it makes really great breadcrumbs. So nothing goes to waste. I know some people, speaking of not wasting, they take sourdough starter, they dehydrate it, and then they crush that up in a blender as well. And that's what they use instead of rice flour to flour their bread, to get that nice contrast in the oven of the white flour and the dark browned bread. So that's another option for people who either don't want to pay for the rice flour because you have nearly free sourdough starter that you can dehydrate, or can't handle rice. You know, some people have a rice sensitivity. I actually thought I did at one point, but thankfully I do okay now. So those are your sort of options. I'm noticing there's some moisture in my spinach. So I'm going to take the same paper towel I used earlier to absorb some moisture from the olives. I'm just going to soak that up because you really don't want to introduce a lot of liquid. This has to sit and rise a little longer once you roll it up, and you don't want that extra moisture in the spinach to affect your dough. So I use fresh spinach that I cooked down, so it's all cooled. You could use frozen. I would highly suggest that if you use frozen, you put it in either a cheesecloth or just a really clean, you know, cotton cloth, and squeeze out all of the liquid. Again, you don't want that extra liquid in your calzone, but frozen spinach especially has tons of it, so you don't want that. I'll just tell you right now, you don't. It creates a mess. So now I'm adding some olives. I personally like olives in my calzone. And then we're gonna load it up with lots of pepperoni and then some cheese and roll her up. I am gonna pause you for the cheese prepping part. Hopefully it doesn't turn off on me. And we'll go ahead and add that. I'm gonna add two kinds. Our family eats manchego cheese because we have a milk protein allergy. And so I'm going to shred up some manchego. And we also use pecorino romano, which is also a sheep's cheese, just like manchego, that we can tolerate because it has a different protein than cow's milk. So those are the two cheeses I am using, but you could stick like cheddar cheese in here. You could put Parmesan. That would be delicious. I mean, calzones are amazing because you can put whatever you want in them, honestly. You could make savory ones. You could do sweet ones with, like, I don't know, a nice layer of cinnamon and some raisins and some nuts, and roll that puppy up, and that would be delicious. You could get some apples if you wanted to do something seasonal for the fall. You could get apples and cut them up into small pieces and saute them with some coconut oil. I wouldn't go too heavy on any of that, and again, make sure that you leave them a little firm so that they're not applesauce. And you could put a nice layer of those with some cinnamon and roll that up, and that would be delicious. Even with regular dough, like, it doesn't have to be a sweet dough for you to use sweet ingredients, like, and make it a sweet thing. You also don't have to, like that, the cinnamon raisin and nut one could be like a cinnamon roll, but you don't have to cut it. You could leave it, sorry about the noise. You could leave it all rolled up like a calzone and just cut it after it's baked, which is another option. So you can see how much, I'm covering this. It really needs, this much, because once you roll it up, you don't, if you're expecting calzone, you don't want to just bite into dough that's got like a little bit of something in there. I will say you want to leave some space to close up your calzone. I'm going to scooch these over a little bit. You want to leave a little bit of space. I know I can stretch this. The end here is a little thick, so I know that I can stretch that to seal it up once I'm done. But you don't want to go all the way to the edge. Otherwise, you won't have a way of closing that up, and you'll end up with stuff leaked everywhere. So once this is all done and rolled up, it's going to go in the pan, whichever one we decide to use, for a few hours and rise a little bit. I'm not looking for it to get huge. Actually, your second rise, even for your bread, should be about half size. Rather than doubling in size, it should be about half. So that's what you're looking for. Okay, I think we're good on pepperoni, and we're out of spinach, and I think we're good on olives. There's a lot of olives in here. I'm gonna go get the cheese ready, wash my hands, and come back to finish this. So. Okay, so I cleaned up a little bit, and I got myself a few things, actually, because I forgot to add some spices. I wanted to do that on the mayonnaise. So this is just garlic powder, organic garlic powder from Trader Joe's. Actually, I think I got it on Azure Standard, and I just refill. So that's a great place to get bulk flour and things like that. Some basil, because who doesn't love basil? Some organic onion powder, parsley, all the essentials. You can make it however you want. You know what would be really good in here, and I've done this before, is peppers, sauteed peppers and onions with some shaved steak. That would be delicious with some cheese. Oh my goodness. We have pepper and salt. And because I seasoned the spinach really well, I know this doesn't need a whole lot, but I am adding a lot of bread to this, and you're supposed to season each layer as you cook. So that's what we're doing here. All right, this is pecorino romano. So we'll put a generous coating of that all along. This is a hard cheese if you're not familiar with it, much like Parmesan, but it's sheep's cheese. And this adds a really good flavor. It's not quite as stinky as Parmesan, I don't find anyway. It is hard like it though, so it's great to sprinkle on soups. The other night I made a chicken and broccoli with rotini, and I added sprinkles of this to top it off, and it was delicious. Okay, then we have manchego, which is, we buy the giant wheels of manchego and then we cut it up. We find that to be more cost effective. I think Costco has them. We get them from Restaurant Depot, but it's a softer cheese than, say, Parmesan. It's more like a cheddar. Has a mild flavor, and I don't mind the chunks because those are just going to be delicious. So it's easier to shred than the Pecorino Romano. You could put sun-dried tomatoes in here with this. That would be so good. If I had those, I definitely would. You could even put a light pasta sauce, like a marinara or something, down instead of the mayonnaise, as just something to moisten the bread or the dough before it turns into bread, and add a little flavor. So that would be a good option. I'm trying to think what other combos. You could do like a taco calzone, so you could put like the taco meat and the cheeses and all the things you like in your tacos, refried beans, olives, tomatoes. What else do people put in their tacos? I usually put it on top of a salad, so I just have all the salad fixings. We already talked about steak and peppers. No, I mean, it's endless. Meatballs, eggplant, chicken parm. You can really get creative with calzones, and they go a long way. They're very filling. So you don't have to, you know, this seems like a lot of work, but we're going to eat off of this for probably 2 lunches. And when you, like me, cook everything from scratch, if you can get more than 1 meal out of your time, it's of great benefits. Okay, now it's time to roll it up. So, let's start on this side, and I like to get it started on its own, and then I will use the mat to help move it along. The dough is very soft and happy. It's starting to get fluffy again already, so it won't take long for this to rise, I'm sure. But see how using the mat, it just rolls it right up, like it's very little effort. It does all the work. And as long as I go slow and keep the tension on it, it rolls up nicely. I'm gonna just slide this way a little bit. Okay. The next thing I like to do is get this thing scooched over a bit. Okay, so I'm not looking for cinnamon roll tightness on this. It's actually fine that it's a little loose, and we're going to be able to close this up by stretching that end up, and then you want to make sure that end is the one you place it on when you put it down in the pan. Okay. We also can close up our ends here by just tucking them under. I don't know how well you can see that, but you just sort of take the end, pinch it together, and tuck it under. And that creates a beautiful loaf for your calzone. You can go ahead before you bake it and put some melted butter on the top and sprinkle it with some more spices if you want. I've done that before. A little cheese. Sometimes the cheese can burn because it's in there for a bit, so you might want to save the cheese for towards the end, but that's an option for sure. If you do a spicy one, you could add some like chili powder spice to the top so that you can identify which one's spicy. But we're gonna stick this, I think it's a little too long for the glass pan. It's a little bit not long enough for the cast iron, but it can be stretched. So we're gonna use the cast iron. I think that's a good option. I could butter this. I'm gonna just choose to use parchment paper so that cleanup is a little easier when the time comes. So this is really soft. So you know what I actually might do is transfer it to the parchment paper first. And then, see, it's all about experimenting as you go. And then you can easily put it right in the pan and then open it up. Dough is really quite forgiving. So this won't be a complete circle, but it'll certainly get a nice shape to it. Sorry about the parchment paper, I know it's loud in the camera. And this is gonna sit with the lid on just to keep it from drying out so it can rise for a couple of hours. Turn it this way so you can see it. Again, this is just to feed my family, so I'm not concerned about it being all super fancy looking. I could have just picked it up and put it right on a sheet pan, covered it for a couple of hours, and popped it in the oven, and that would be delicious too. But I really like the way the cast iron, the effect it has on cooking the dough. So we're gonna go with the cast iron. It has a nice even cook. Okay, so that's just gonna rise. It'd be cool if it had gone all the way around, but I also rolled it on the short side, so that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. I will try and post pictures of what all of these look like when they're done. Our English muffins have a few more hours of rising. This definitely has a couple of hours of rising. And I'm gonna clean up the mess. And I think the next video is gonna be the sandwich loaf recipe, which is slightly different than your base recipe that I showed earlier. So we'll come back in a little bit and do that one when my starter is done rising, because we fed that, and so now we need to wait for that to do its magic, and we'll be good to go. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen today.